Hi, welcome to Seeking the Kingdom of God channel. So, this is another edition of the teaching Radical Giving, and this is part 9. Well, the past 2 days, you were probably wondering, we don't see any radical giving happening in Joseph's life yet. He's still in prison. Well, if you are in prison and you are the head of the prison, then you're supposed to be the recipient of everybody's cruelty or the anger and the rudeness and the authoritarianism of a prison. I don't think Joseph's life in prison fitted any of those normal ways of looking at prison life. He was the almost the head of the prison, so to speak. Remember, the prisoner, the jailer, the captain of the guard had given Joseph all the responsibility of the prison itself. So he was prosperous there as well. So, but that isn't really what would match our vision of prosperity, right? So let's see what happens now that Joseph is out of the jail. What's going to happen to him? He has yet to interpret the dream of the king of Pharaoh, and let's see how he does that and what is the result of that. So now we are going to the 41st chapter of the book of Genesis, and we'll begin at verse 17, where we left off yesterday. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all of the land of Egypt." Gaunt means to the bone, thin to the bone. So you could see their skeletal structures through their skin. That's what gaunt means. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as the beginning. So I awoke, said the Pharaoh. Again, he continues in verse 22. Also, I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk. 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind. Blighted meaning diseased, brown. I mean, they were not healthy. Blighted by the east wind, sprang up after the healthy heads. And the thin heads devoured, meaning ate up, consumed, the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, verse 25, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are also 7 years. The dreams are one, they're one and the same. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will deplete the land, meaning it will completely erase whatever was remaining in the land, will be completely erased by the famine, deplete, erased, come back to zero. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following. for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now, the dream was interpreted. Apparently, Pharaoh understood the dream very well. So basically, what Joseph told him was that both the dreams are one and the same. The seven healthy cows and the seven healthy heads of grain indicate 7 years of plenty, and so plentiful that it was going to be an overflow, which would then be followed by 7 years of famine, and such great famine that nobody has ever experienced it before. And the famine is so bad that it will be as though the 7 years of plenty had never existed. So that would be the kind of uh, situation that was going to come up on the earth and in the land of Egypt. So 14 years from the day that Pharaoh got the dream was what was being predicted by the dream. Now, in verse 33, we read, "Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt." So now Joseph began to advise the Pharaoh about what should be his course of action in light of the dream that he had got. So he said, verse 34, "Let Pharaoh do this and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years." So during the time that there was going to be plenty in the land, let the officers of the Pharaoh who he appoints collect 1/5 of all the produce, okay, and store it during the time of plenty, and let them gather all the food that was collected, gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh. So Pharaoh has authority over all the storage of the grains that were going to be collected during the time of plenty, and let them keep food in the cities. So it was not like as though there was a central granary that where it would be stored. It would be stored in the various areas where the collection points were. So already Joseph was thinking decentralization. He was not looking at a central area. He was looking at the land having points of warehouses or points of collection, which would then turn into granaries in those areas. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. So the reserve granaries would provide food for the citizens of the country during the time of the famine. Now, this advice, so in verse 37, so the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh. I think anybody listening to the advice would say it is great advice. It would be foolish if they looked at that or listened to that advice and said, "Oh, is there any other option?" I don't think so. It was too good to ignore or to second guess, right? So advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? I don't think I have found anybody in all my land and country who's as wise as this man, who has the Spirit of God living in him." Then the Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this," considering that God has shown you the interpretation of my dream, "there is no one as discerning and wise as you. No one, there's no one in this land who's able to um, make a make a difference of, or uh, mm, segregate a dream from the reality, be able to look at not just what is going to happen, but also come up with solutions. And the solutions are not half baked, they are fully comprehensive, and they seem to be so comprehensive that the famine will not be able to overcome the kingdom of Egypt." So he looks at this wisdom and looks at this ability to discern, ability to make a differentiation, to differentiate between what should be done and what is conjecture and what is not, what is plain execution, what needs to be executed. So that kind of discernment is what I can see in you, because you're so wise. So he tells him, you shall be over my house. There you go. The whole cycle is repeating itself. First, it was Potiphar, who kept Joseph in his house and made him the lord of his house. Then it was the jailer who kept him in the jail and made him the lord of the prison. Now here Pharaoh is next, and he is going to set him over all his house, meaning his palace. And you will see more, much more than just the palace. He says, "You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word." It was like he was giving him the reins of the kingdom. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. I will have the position of king. You will have the position of my executor. But at the same time, you will rule over my household and over my people. And everybody will do according to what you say. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. All the land of Egypt is yours. It is yours to govern." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring, as if that wasn't enough. He took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. So this was the seal. The signet ring is a seal which is authority to authorize any rule or any kind of a new edict that Pharaoh was going to pass, or in his stead, Joseph was going to pass, and he had the authority to sign it off using the Pharaoh's signet ring, so that nobody will question the authority of the order. So he took his signet ring off and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. So it was like, he gave him the best of garments and a gold chain and his own signet ring. After that, this wasn't enough for the king. So he said, and he had him ride in the second chariot which he had. So anywhere that the king went, he would go first in the first chariot, and the second chariot was Joseph's. And they cried out before him, "Bow the knee." So it was not just enough to ride behind the Pharaoh, ride behind the king. So just like they treated the Pharaoh with obeisance, they bowed down on a knee to acknowledge his kingship over them. They had to do the same for Joseph as well. So it was as though they had a king and a king. So they had to bow down to Pharaoh as Joseph as well. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." So he told him that I'm Pharaoh, and because I'm Pharaoh, I'm decreeing this, I'm making this declaration. What is a declaration? That without your consent, not without my consent, not without the Pharaoh's consent, but without Joseph's consent, no man may lift his hand or foot. It was like every movement that every Egyptian made had to be determined by Joseph. So that was the level of his authority that the Pharaoh gave to him. No one may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. So that's a way of saying that Pharaoh had given Joseph that extent of authority. It's not as though I will lift my hand, but I have to check with Joseph first. Can I lift my hand? Can I lift my foot? No. Joseph would determine what are the actions that the Egyptians could take. So can you see the radical giving happening here from step by step by step till now? Joseph in the house of Potiphar or in the jail just was lord over it, right? Now it was like he was king. He was not just lord over the land of Egypt. He was king and second only to the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh did more. He called Joseph a new name. He gave him a new name because he had a new position. And Zaphnath Paneah was his name that he gave to him. and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of the priest of Egypt at that time. So Asenath was the name of Joseph's wife. So he gave him a wife, and he gave him a position, he gave him authority, he gave him clothes, and I'm sure a place to live was part of the whole deal. He must have given him a palace to live in, and all of this he was given. And so Joseph now went out over all the land of Egypt. So Joseph was not the kind of person who sat through things. He did things. So when he got the responsibility, he fulfilled it to his best. And what did he first do? He went out over all the land of Egypt. So at this time that this happened, when Joseph was brought to the king, and then he interpreted his dream for him, and when the king gave him all these responsibilities and the authorities which accompanied those responsibilities, when he did all of that, Joseph was 30 years old. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now, what he did exactly what he had advised. In the 7 plentiful years that the ground brought forth abundantly, he gathered up all the food, the 1/5 of the food that he was supposed to collect, that the officers of Pharaoh were supposed to collect. He gathered all that food and laid up the food in the cities. Remember, decentralization? Joseph did it at that time. He laid it up in the cities, and he laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. So the collection point and the storage point was in the same area. Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. So God's prediction about the dream that the 7 years of plenty would be so plenty that they would be to the point of overflowing. So when he collected, he stopped counting the grain that he was collecting. It was as though it was like the sand of the sea. Can you ever understand, and can you ever measure how much sand is in the sea, or how much sand is at the edge of the sea on the seashore? It's impossible. It's impossible to count it. You can't even make a guess about the number of grains of sand that are there on the seashore, right? So that is how it was. It was immeasurable. That was the amount of plenty he gathered. And then later on we read that there were 2 sons that were born to him in the land of Egypt, and he named those sons to mean something very important to him. The first son he named Manasseh, and which meant, for God has made me forget all my toil, all the hard work that he had put till now, and all my father's house. So all the angst, all the evil things that had happened to him because of his brothers, he was able to forget when he had the firstborn son Manasseh. Then the second-born son he called Ephraim, and the name of Ephraim meant, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. So the name meant that I have become plenteous. I have borne fruit, so much fruit, and that too in a place where I was treated badly. I was treated as a slave. I was sentenced to imprisonment for no fault of my own. For all of those things, despite all those things, he was fruitful. So that was what the name Ephraim meant. So you can see that his life was an epitome of radical giving by God. So if we think that it was Pharaoh who was giving it, it was God who was moving Pharaoh to do all of that. If it wasn't for God, Joseph wouldn't have been able to interpret the dreams. And if it wasn't for God, Pharaoh wouldn't have figured out that Joseph had the Spirit of God in him, and that's why he was so wise and able to interpret and discern what the dream meant. And then not only did he discern that, not only was he able to separate and segregate and tell Pharaoh the interpretation, he was also able to give Pharaoh the plans on how to deal with the upcoming famine that was about to hit the land of Egypt. Now, if we talked about the 7 years of plenty, then the 7 years of famine also would be recorded. Indeed, they are. So here it is, it's in verse 53. Then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all lands, it was everywhere around the world. But in all the land of Egypt, there was bread. So where Joseph was, there was something to eat. But the rest of the countries surrounding Egypt, there was nothing at all. There was a famine. They didn't have Joseph to tell them that they should store the plenty. They just were so happy that they consumed it all, and probably, through what they couldn't consume, or sold and made money out of it. But money doesn't feed you, right? So they probably did a whole lot of things, but they didn't store it because they didn't have Joseph in their land to help them out, or they didn't have the kind of advisor that Joseph was to their kings, right? So they were experiencing famine like never before. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, when there was no grain that they could grow, when the land was not producing anything, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. So they cried out to Pharaoh, we need bread, we can't survive anymore in this famine. So then the Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you to do. Don't come to me. I am not responsible for this. Joseph is. I've told you already that Joseph has got all authority. So just go to him and he will tell you what to do, and just do what he says to do. So the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. So apparently the Egyptians, not only did they have plenty during the years of plenty, they also had made a lot of money from their plenty. So they had plenty of money but no food to eat. So now they could use that money to buy bread from Pharaoh. So they bought bread, they bought grain from the storehouses, and they were able to feed themselves. And the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So it was very bad, just like it was in all the other lands. But in Egypt, they were not famished, they were not hungry, they were able to eat and were able to sustain themselves through the famine. So all the countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all lands. Now, the news of the fact that there is grain in Egypt wasn't restricted to the area of Egypt itself. The news spread because people come to trade. So traders don't generally come from your own country. They come from other countries as well. There was a lot of export and import that probably went on in that age too. So they got to hear, the people who came to Egypt saw that Egyptians were not hungry at all, and they had enough bread for themselves and to spare to sell to other countries as well. So they went back to their lands and told the people of their lands, that there is grain in Egypt. So people came from other lands to buy grain from Egypt, from Joseph. All right? They came to Joseph. They didn't come to Pharaoh. They came to Joseph because Pharaoh had assigned the responsibility, had delegated that total responsibility of taking care of his whole land, of governing his land. All of it was with Joseph now. So Joseph was the one who was doing it. Now, if you will look at it, this is again another type of Jesus. So Jesus, when he came out of prison, when he rose again from the dead, when he came out of the prison of death, which all of us are bound in, or the fear of death that we are bound in, all of those things was totally decimated or totally broken in the life of Jesus, because Jesus was a man when he came to earth. But when he rose again as a man, and he broke the prison of death. He broke the prison of bondage to sin. He broke the prison of bondage to disease. He broke the prison of bondage to lack. He broke the prison of bondage to the fear of death, of anything, of ill will, actions, bad actions against you. He broke the bondage of all of that. And when he did that, he went to the Father, and the Father, if you will read it in the book of Revelation, in chapter 12, I'll put the reference below. The Father gives him everything, riches, power, wisdom, everything that is needed for man, who, not for him. Jesus doesn't need it in heaven. He has it so that he can give it to us. So he, just like Pharaoh gave everything to Joseph, so did God give everything to Jesus. And in Jesus, if you are in Jesus, you have access to that. You have access to power over evil. You have access to power over sin. You have access to power over disease, over sickness. You have access to riches in him. You have access to wisdom in him. The same wisdom that Joseph showed to Pharaoh is available to all of us in Jesus. So again, the type of Joseph is running parallel to the life of Jesus. How it is now, because Joseph's release from prison is the same as Jesus' resurrection from the dead. And Joseph's richness, his authority over the whole land of Egypt, is similar to Jesus' authority now on all mankind. He is the authority over all mankind. You may not see it happening everywhere because not everybody believes in Jesus, but those who believe in Jesus can access that same authority and have authority over everything that is trying to work against you. So can you see the radical giving in the life of Joseph and the similar kind of a radical giving to us through Jesus? That is what is happening here. And let's look at his wife. Joseph was given a wife. Who do you think is Jesus's partner in all of this? A wife is a partner. If you don't understand that, you should know it right away. A wife is a partner. So who is Jesus's partner in this whole thing? We, the people who believe in him here on earth, are his partners. So we are the ones who are gaining from his wealth, from what has been given to him. So whatever was stolen by the enemy in the Garden of Eden, in the life of Adam, was restored back totally. Everything got restored back totally to Jesus, and he's inviting us to take it from him and use that authority to live a wholesome life here on earth right now, beginning now. Not wait for the time that when we will go to sleep and be again with him and there. We don't need it there. It's all in that land of in the land of heaven. You don't need it. This is where you need, here on earth, and that is what has been given to you. That's the kind of freedom we have. So that's it for today, and I'm glad you were with me through this teaching, and I'm glad we were able to see the way in which we have all the authority in Christ. So if you feel that you have been blessed by this channel, and if God is telling you, asking you to give to this channel, you're welcome to do so. You can do it to via PhonePe to the number 93554-71129. And if you give, I would love to send you a free ebook as a gift. So do write to me at stkogchannel2020@gmail.com, and I would love to express my appreciation of your gift, and I'll send you the free ebook. So don't forget to like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, and press the bell icon. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.